Officer Mark Wilson was no stranger to the chaos of the streets. As a police officer, he spent years putting his life on the line every day, working in some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city. But nothing in his training or experience could prepare him for what would happen when he died. In a shocking twist of fate, Mark found himself facing a spiritual reckoning that would forever change his understanding of life, death, and the afterlife. This is the incredible story of what happened when Officer Mark Wilson met God after his death, and what he was told about the choices we make in life will leave you astounded. It was just another routine shift for Officer Mark Wilson, or so he thought. The night started like any other, patrolling the streets, responding to calls, and dealing with the usual criminal activity. But everything changed when he responded to a high-speed chase. In the blink of an eye, Mark was caught in the crossfire, and the next thing he knew, he was lying on the pavement, his body lifeless, blood pooling around him. As Mark's consciousness faded, he felt a strange sensation, a peaceful feeling, like he was floating. He wasn't in pain anymore. It was as if everything that had caused him stress, fear, or anguish during his life had simply evaporated. There was no more fear of death. No more anxiety. It was as if he was being pulled into a light, and that's when he realized, he was no longer in his body. He had died. As Mark's soul left his lifeless body behind, he was drawn toward a bright, welcoming light in the distance. He wasn't sure what it was, but he felt an overwhelming sense of peace and comfort. There was no longer any noise, no chaos. It was as though he had entered another realm, one far different from the violent, unpredictable world he had just left. Soon, Mark found himself standing in what appeared to be a vast, serene field, bathed in golden light. He didn't know where he was, but he knew that it was a place unlike anything he had ever experienced. He felt a presence beside him, a gentle force that seemed to emanate love, understanding, and wisdom. Then, before him, appeared a figure, the figure of a man, radiating an aura of incredible peace and power. Mark instinctively knew it was God. Standing before God, Mark was overwhelmed by a sense of both awe and humility. The presence of God was so powerful that he could barely comprehend it. He was speechless, trying to process the enormity of what was happening. God spoke, and his voice was not loud, but it carried an authority and love that Mark could feel deep in his soul. "Mark," God said, "you have lived a life of service, but there are things you must understand. Your work as a police officer, your courage in the face of danger, is important. But it's not just the actions you take that matter, it's the heart behind those actions." Mark was confused, unsure of what God meant. He had always believed that the key to his life's purpose was doing his job well and keeping the streets safe. But God's next words shook him to the core. "What you need to understand, Mark, is that the purpose of your life goes beyond what you see in this world. Your purpose was never just about your job, your career, or your accomplishments," God continued. "It was always about love, how you treat others, how you share kindness, how you offer forgiveness. These are the things that matter most." Mark stood in silence, processing what God was saying. He had always tried to do his best, help others, and fight for justice, but he had never truly considered how deeply his actions impacted the lives of those around him. He had always focused on the external, the visible results of his work. But now, standing before God, he realized that it was the internal, his heart and his choices, that mattered the most. "Mark, you were called to serve others, not just with your actions but with your heart," God explained. "You must learn to forgive, to show compassion, to act out of love, not just duty." God then showed Mark visions of his life, moments he had forgotten, moments where his actions had not been motivated by love or understanding. There were times when he had acted out of anger or judgment, moments when he had hardened his heart. It wasn't that Mark had been evil or malicious, but God was showing him that even the smallest moments of bitterness, indifference, or selfishness could leave scars on the soul. You see, Mark, the path to heaven isn't just about avoiding evil, it's about choosing love every day. It's about living with an open heart, not just being right or doing your job. It's about choosing peace over conflict, and forgiveness over resentment, God said, his voice gentle but firm. Mark felt an overwhelming sense of regret. He had been so focused on doing the right thing, on achieving success in his career, that he hadn't always made love and kindness his priority. It wasn't that he had done anything terribly wrong, but he had missed the true calling of his life, to love others deeply and unconditionally. God's presence remained soothing, but then Mark was shown a different scene, one that was far darker. It was a vision of hell, a place filled with suffering and torment, not just physical but spiritual. He saw souls trapped in isolation, cut off from God's love. Mark recoiled at the sight, unable to comprehend the full extent of the suffering. This is the end for those who refuse love, Mark, God said, his voice filled with sorrow. Hell is not just a place of punishment, it is a state of separation from God, from love, from everything that is good. It is the result of choices made during life, the refusal to accept God's love, the rejection of forgiveness, the stubbornness of the heart. Mark was horrified by the vision, and he understood then that the true cost of living a life without love and compassion was eternal separation from the source of all goodness. God then focused on one key aspect of Mark's life that had weighed heavily on his soul: forgiveness. As a police officer, Mark had dealt with a lot of anger, crime, and betrayal. It wasn't always easy to forgive those who had hurt others or caused harm, but God showed Mark how essential forgiveness was, not only for others but for himself. Forgiveness is the key to releasing the chains that bind your heart, Mark, God explained. Without forgiveness, your soul will remain trapped in bitterness and pain. But when you forgive, you open the door to healing, to peace, and to reconciliation with me. Mark realized that he had been holding on to grudges, both from his career and his personal life. It wasn't that he had been consumed with hatred, but there were unresolved hurts that he had never fully addressed. Now, in the presence of God, he understood that forgiveness was the only way to release the burden of pain and find true peace. As Mark absorbed these revelations, God gave him a choice. Mark, it is not yet your time. You have more to learn and more to give. You have the opportunity to return to your life, but you must change. You must live with love in your heart, with compassion and forgiveness, and with a deeper understanding of the purpose of your life. Mark's heart was heavy, but he knew that the decision was his to make. He had been shown the truth, and now it was up to him to live according to that truth. With a sense of humility and resolve, Mark chose to return, understanding that the rest of his life would be dedicated to living with love, forgiveness, and a heart open to others. Mark woke up in the hospital, gasping for air, feeling a profound sense of peace. The trauma of the accident was still fresh, but he was no longer the same man. He now understood that the true purpose of life was not in the external achievements or successes, but in the love we give, the forgiveness we offer, and the compassion we show others. He was determined to live with a renewed sense of purpose, focusing not just on his duty as a police officer but on being a servant of love and compassion. Officer Mark Wilson's experience with God opened his eyes to the truth about life, death, and what truly matters. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about living with a heart of love, forgiveness, and compassion. His journey reminds us all that the choices we make today have eternal consequences. If you found Mark's story meaningful, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more incredible near-death experiences and spiritual revelations.